right, so we have been in Memphis, Tennessee all week long teaching our de-escalation course for corrections. And we call it De-escalation for corrections, but it's an instructor course. It's a 4-day course. It's an immersive, transferable course that is not just for de-escalation. That's one of the misnomers, I think, but it does heavily apply for that scenario. And so that's how we frame it that way. Today I got Ian Edwards with me, the brainchild of this course, and I'm really excited to kind of digest it a little bit, because I'll be honest, today was a heavy day, and for those who went through the course, you'll know exactly what we're talking about. But it was a heavy day, not just for our students, but for the instructors as well. Yeah. And I'm really excited to kind of share the takeaways that we got and just kind of describe what it is we're offering and providing. So thanks for doing this, man. I appreciate it. I think one of the biggest things that we try to do with this, and if not the biggest, it's definitely the framework around it, is providing a level of safety for the students to then take that and provide a level of safety to begin the process of de-escalation. Yeah. How did you come up with that?
Well, I mean, where do we start, right? It really begins with what de-escalation is, or where we start the class, as you know, is you can't understand de-escalation without first understanding escalation.
Right.
What escalates a human being? What brings them from a place of calm to a place of combatant?
Yeah.
Or anger, or any of the things that we have. And really, it is, I don't feel safe at the core of any altercation. When people are combative toward a certain political group or an industry or a coworker,
a spouse,
what they are saying is, I don't feel safe with you.
Yeah.
And so safety is the key across the board to making anybody start to de-escalate. We also know that we can't begin to de-escalate anybody else. In fact, there's a lot of people out there that say you cannot de-escalate somebody else. You can only provide the environment for them to feel safe.
Yeah.
Which then, as a natural result, creates de-escalation. But we also know that we have to first make ourselves feel safe.
Right.
So what you were alluding to is the fact that in the environment of our class, we have to create a sense of safety among the students.
Yeah. Absolutely. And it also is an instructor development course. And the reason why I kind of add that is because from the very get-go, we are creating safety.
Yes.
And they have no idea. No. And of course you do now. But the idea is that instead of just having people filter in, find a seat, kind of shuffle in meekly, what we try to do is create an environment that is so welcoming that we start to elicit that response where they start to feel more safe than they would if they just sat down next to somebody they didn't know, and then we have to pry that out, right? And so we're shaking hands, we're learning about their lives, we're learning about what agency they go to, that type of thing. And it's kind of a bit of a red herring, but it's not, because it's also really genuine. We genuinely care about the people that are in our classes. And so just setting that framework there. And I think we all know that person that can go into a hostile, volatile situation, provide a sense of calm and a sense of safety that can alleviate a lot of those tensions. But let's face it, we also know that person that can go in and take a totally calm cell and light that thing on fire just by being there, right? So
absolutely.
And both of those sides don't even know why they're doing it. And so being able to put a framework into that and kind of that guiding light of how do we make this safe is so critical. I think by creating the different drills that we have in the class, by creating the different methodologies that we have in the class, they start to peak onto that safety piece. And really where that comes from is a level of vulnerability.
Oh, man.
And if we're not being vulnerable with the people that we're dealing with, they're definitely not going to do the same in turn. And so what we found is that as the instructor course progresses, by creating vulnerability in the facilitators and teaching them how to do that as well, now we start to begin this safe space process. And it really is modeling the de-escalation model. So,
and this is why you say it takes a lot from us, right?
Yeah.
Because we have to be vulnerable, we have to be big, we have to put ourselves out there and reveal things about ourselves that maybe is uncomfortable. But you and I were talking earlier over lunch about this concept, which is confidence. A lot of us want to portray confidence.
Yeah.
And so we eliminate the concept of vulnerability. We say, I am not going to be vulnerable because I want to appear confident. But when I see these actions in people, always I say they are the least confident people in the room. And you know this too. You've experienced it. If you don't have the ability to be vulnerable, to be silly, to play, to show, to be open, and show that you are human at the end of the day, then you are not confident. It's the people, and we call it a confidence hack.
Yeah.
You may not have confidence, but you can hack confidence.
Mm-hmm.
And the confidence hack is, are you willing to be embarrassed? And for most people, they say, no, absolutely not for me. I don't want to be embarrassed. I'm not going to put myself out there. Why are more people afraid of public speaking than death?
They are. They'd rather die than have to do
things. Die than be on stage. It's because embarrassment is one of those things that we shy away from. But it is people who are willing to be embarrassed and look silly and show their imperfections to the world that we say, they are so confident.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and on the other side of that too, I'm sure everybody in the audience knows somebody that has to go around and talk about how bad they are.
Yeah.
Right. And how tough they are. And 100% they are not. Because what I've found in at least my career, if you have to go around and say that, you're just telling that to you, right? You're not actually acting that out, because if you were, you wouldn't have to tell people that. Yeah. And so by creating that vulnerability within your behaviors, and you mentioned it great. If you don't have confidence, you can hack confidence. There's also an element of faking it until you make it, right? And a good friend of mine in one of the groups I belong to uses a term, and that's called faith it till you make it. And I love that. But really it's, hey, let's do the thing. Let's just get it done, whether I look ridiculous or not. And I'll tell you, I've never been steered wrong by that methodology. Yeah. I may look like a fool for sure, but just by doing it and getting the reps in, eventually you kind of don't.
Yeah.
Because that's how we're allowed to go into an area where we're unfamiliar. We didn't know these people before this week.
Right.
We can go in there, act a fool, and we walk out super confident still, because of really we're the only ones in the room that can go to that level of confidence. And that's why we're building our students up that way. Yeah.
Well, what I would say is, you and I have had this conversation for years. You and I have both walked away from, you walked away from a city job into a state role, and then walked away from a state level position. I walked away from the county into a state role, walked away from state, all to start our own businesses, with the idea that if fear was not a factor, what would I do with my life? If fear wasn't controlling my decisions, what would I do with my life? How would I level up my game? And what is the worst possible case scenario? And can you live with the consequences of this decision, which made us ultimately move into the unknown?
Right.
Right. And I can only speak for myself, but I do not regret stepping out, being vulnerable to see what happens.
No. And looking back, we're kind of going into that entrepreneurship area, but looking back, I don't think that I would ever want to return to that type of atmosphere. No. With that being said, though, I'm so glad I did it, right?
Yeah, for sure.
I would not give up that part of my life for anything, because I learned so many powerful lessons in that role within the corrections world, and then onto the state trainer worlds and all that. And I wouldn't give that up. But I think when you reach a point where you're no longer growing, and we go back to this topic of comfort and discomfort, but when you reach a point in your life where you're no longer growing, you have to make a change.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you're not pursuing your purpose. And if you're not pursuing your purpose, it is a game changer. It'll get you bogged down. That's why we have so much burnout. That's why we have so much attrition in the world of corrections there. So I alluded to this idea of comfort and discomfort, and we talk heavily on that.
Man. Yeah.
So I think that the thing that we get from it is, if you're staying in your comfort zone, you're stagnant. You're not growing. In fact, you make a really great point, and that is, you can only grow.
You can only grow
if you're outside of your comfort zone.
Absolutely. I mean, it's the gym, right? I don't know if you've ever watched like Pumping Iron, and it was Arnold Schwarzenegger back in the day before he became who he is now. And he's, I don't know if you've seen Pumping Iron, but he says it is the rep that you want to give up. That is the rep. That is your starting point. It is every rep after that actually counts. It's not the first 10 or 15 reps that mean anything. It's the one that you want to stop. That's where you start at 1.
Wow.
That's the one. The one, every rep after that makes you want to push to the point of exhaustion, push to the point of failure, push to the point of throwing up. And in life, when we start to apply this philosophy to other areas of our life, okay, now I want to give up. This is my starting point.
I love that. Yeah. Because if you're operating under a safety net, you always feel, bound to it.
Yeah,
if
absolutely.
That makes sense. And so, I'll be honest, and people are going to love this story, but you took the leap out of the profession first, right? You decided, hey, and you have a great story behind it about what your wife told you, and I love it, and it inspires me. So I don't know if you want to say that, but I feel like this idea that if you had no fear of the consequences, what would you do?
Well, so yeah, I'm happy to share the story. It was in the whole height of COVID. I was assistant commander at the academy, the police academy out there in Washington State, and overseeing all the corrections work. We got sent home. There was an active COVID case at the academy at the time, and got sent home for 2 weeks. They shut all operations down. This was before we had any clue on how to do things on Zoom, do things online. We had no idea what we were going to do. So they basically just said, go home. My wife shows up with tickets to, or a ticket for me to attend Tony Robbins' Unleash the Power Within.
Oh, wow.
4-day. It was his first online Zoom because he was dealing with the same thing we all were.
Sure, yeah.
How do I move forward? But he was quick to adapt. He put it all online. I think there was like 30,000 attendees. He created this massive, immersive stadium for Zoom. And I was in this class for 4 days, and it really just got me thinking about what is my potential? What am I capable of? What is possible in my life? And I went back home with a different frame of mind. I cleared the table. I've got papers out, easel paper.
A beautiful mind.
Let's go. Let's figure out what the next steps are. And I remember my wife saying, why don't we just sell the house? And we've got 4 kids.
Yes, you do.
She goes, let's just sell the house and buy an RV and we'll just travel around and live in an RV. Now, I'll tell you right now, that was not even a thought in my mind.
That wasn't on the radar.
That was not on the radar. And I was thinking, that is my worst case scenario, that I would have my family in an RV without like a stable home. I grew up, bounced around. My parents divorced, and they both remarried, and they got divorced, and I was all over the place growing up. So instability for me was a nightmare scenario. And when she said, "Why don't we just do this?" She's a stay-at-home mom, homeschooling our children at the time. And I was thinking, you just presented to me my worst case scenario as an option for life. So it put me into a place of reflection that if I pursue my dream, worst case is what she just presented as an option.
Yeah. It's within the realm of possibility.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's not the end of the world.
It's not the end of the world. I could get knocked down, but I'll get back up and keep moving.
Yeah.
So that conversation was big for me. Am I willing to accept the worst possible outcome for this and move forward?
Yeah.
Right? Am I going to stay in my comfort where I'm not really fulfilling my dream? I'm not pursuing anything. I'm not growing.
Yeah.
Just because I have a steady paycheck and someone to take care of me. And I'll tell you right now, I did 4 years in the Air Force, and I could have stayed. I loved the Air Force. I actually really did love the Air Force. And I remember being given that option. I was in Saudi Arabia at the time, so during reenlistment, I could have reenlisted tax-free. It would have been a great opportunity to reenlist, but I knew I did not want to reenlist because after high school, when I went into the Air Force, I felt like I traded one parent for another. I traded my parents, my caretakers, the people who were putting a roof over my head, for a new parent, which is the U.S. government. We'll take care of you. All you have to do is show up and work. So I wanted to get out. I wanted to struggle. I wanted to get out there and see what I could do. And when we find ourselves completely reliant on someone just to keep pumping us full of what we expect, oftentimes we're just punching a check, we're checking a box.
Comfortable.
Yeah, it's comfortable to us, but no growth happens in that space, as you said.
So what do you think it is that takes somebody like you that is seeking something that is unsafe, that is what's unique, I think. And we always say safety is the game as a mantra to create that environment where we can de-escalate somebody.
Yeah.
But going out chasing and pursuing discomfort.
Yes.
Is that a skill?
So first of all, let's just unpack that just a little bit more. And yeah, I love that you brought that up. Safety is the game. You can't begin to do anything without a sense of safety.
Right.
So when we talk about safety, we are not talking about comfort.
Right.
Right. And that is the biggest paradox, because a lot of people talk about safety and comfort as if they're synonyms.
Right.
I feel comfortable, therefore I am safe. But it just means that you aren't maybe in a physically harmful situation. You have to, the true measure of whether we feel safe or not is, can I be uncomfortable?
Yeah.
Can I feel the level can I feel safe enough with you to be vulnerable? Can I feel safe enough with you to maybe give you feedback that you don't want to hear, or that I'm afraid to give you? That's a level of safety that we're talking about.
And that, it kind of bleeds into a whole other world that we're going to talk about, but creating that environment where not just de-escalation, but creating safety so that we can elicit vulnerability.
Yes.
And then in that vulnerability, be resilient enough to have an effective change, right? So where I'm going with it is our level up culture that we're trying to build.
Yes.
And nobody loves to get criticized, right? They don't. They freak out. And we ran some drills, and we won't spoil them, but we ran some drills to focus on that. And what was very interesting is we found that people did not like to give that negative feedback, but the ones that received it, they were more comfortable with it.
Yes.
They were more comfortable with it than when they were receiving positive feedback.
Yes.
It's just crazy. And so going back to creating that vulnerability in discomfort, I think that it's an absolute must that we have that as part of our culture in corrections, in law enforcement, because that's where you see agencies plateau. They do not grow anymore. They do not advance because there's no input to encourage that growth.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really interesting because you're a father.
Yep.
And you're constantly giving your daughters feedback, correct?
Yeah.
And why do you do that?
Because I love them.
Because you love them. Why else?
Because I want them to be safe.
You want
and I want them to improve.
Yes, you want to level them up. You want them to improve. You want them to embody certain character traits. Moving forward in life, you want success and happiness for them.
Yeah.
We should honestly look at everyone in our social circle with that same lens. I want the best for you. I want you to improve. I want you to tap into your purpose, actualize everything in your life that you want. And yet I am not willing to give you the feedback that can get you closer to that dream.
Yeah. We have a weird culture in corrections where there is a significant amount of backbiting and complaining.
Yeah.
Everybody listening knows the person that they talk about. But we'll never go out of our comfort zone to go and connect with that person because I don't know what it is. I really don't know what it is, because if you look at it objectively, it doesn't make sense. But the only way moving forward in an organization, if we truly are trying to go further as an organization, if we're trying to push past that threshold, is with providing that feedback in a way that is designed not to kick down, but to lift up.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's very specific to the corrections and law enforcement culture. I would ask the very first question: does a new employee just walking into your organization feel safe enough to make a mistake?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. You know, I that's probably not. Because what do we say about integrity?
Yep.
Right? Integrity. And although it is a critical aspect, right? Being able to have employees that are okay to admit their mistakes without fear of reprisal. I'm going to lose my job. I'm going to be an outcast. People here aren't going to like me.
They're not going to accept me.
That's it, right? Yep. If we go back to Maslow's talking about belonging, that is right there on the scale. And so how do we fix that? How do we create it? I know this is a big lofty goal.
How do we fix that?
Yeah, we'll just wrap that up tonight. But what are some of the attributes that maybe our field training officers or some of our senior officers can imbibe to get that culture fixed?
Yeah. One of the stories that I love, and I'm going to butcher this a little bit, so I'm going to hit the essence of it.
Okay.
But Sarah Blakely, she founded Spanx. She's one of the richest women in America, amazing business owner, a whole ton of companies out there that she owns, incredibly successful. I was watching her on this interview, and they were asking her about her success. What made you so successful? What creates somebody like you that's driving forward, doing this stuff? And she said, essentially, that her father every day after school would sit her down and say, "Where did you fail today?
Oh, wow.
Where did you fail today? Where is an opportunity that you could have went this way, but you went this way, and now looking back, you should have taken a different path, or you, if given the opportunity to do it again, you would have went this way. Where did you fail today?" And she's, when you think about that question, it gives us a couple things. Oh, and here's what they would do. They would celebrate the failure.
Wow.
They would actually celebrate the mistake together. And I think about that in our world, the entrepreneur, also, to answer your question, in our agency, to celebrate the learning of making a bad decision rather than ostracizing or shaming or giving somebody guilt for not being perfect along the way. We don't do this on the range.
No.
We don't say, "Oh, you didn't hit center. You're a bad person."
Right.
We say, "Make these adjustments so that you can hit target."
Yeah.
Right. So it allowed her to be incredibly comfortable with failure. And it also made her fearless to keep driving forward, even with failure as a result. Right. She's willing to keep moving forward, even though failure's on the table.
Such a powerful outlook, right? Because the opposite of that is a culture where you pounce on everybody for every mistake.
Yes.
And what ends up happening with that is, because we know that everybody makes mistakes, everybody's now just pouncing on each other.
Yes.
And God help you if you're a supervisor and you make mistakes who have pounced on other people, because that is a completely destructive culture.
Yes.
When you can't trust your leadership anymore because of fear, the whole thing crumbles, right? And that's how we have people leaving corrections at a ridiculous rate. That's why if you look around and wonder why your staffing is low, you might want to investigate that principle a little bit. It might help, right?
People don't leave safe environments.
Right.
People do not leave safe environments. And so I would ask, what in this environment do your staff feel that they are not safe?
Yeah.
And it is typically not the inmate population or the safety of showing up to work. It is honestly, I don't feel safe with administration. I don't feel safe with my peers.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, talking to several of our students today, that notion was very clear that, hey, I'm not worried about de-escalating inmates at all.
Yeah.
We can handle this. What I'm worried about is going back after experiencing this week and understanding the dynamics of why this is so important, and then being pushed back down by my coworkers and having to go right back into that box again.
Yes.
Yeah, it's very, it's disheartening. But I also think one of the answers to that is training. And it's not just training the individual, because like we talked about, this is a de-escalation for corrections instructor course, right? And so the idea is that we're going to train instructors to go back into their agency, and that is critical. However, it has to start within the culture. And so when we send that instructor back in there, they need support from the administration. And one of the things that I loved about today is we had people that were middle management to high management saying, I need to have all of my admin in here for this class. I have to have them. We got to change everything.
Yes.
And that is such a moving statement for us, because we really do put our heart and souls into it. But it's even more telling because of the cultures that are out there and just people looking around and say, we need to do better if this is going to be possible to keep our facilities up and running. And so with training, we put ourselves in a position where we can model the lessons that we're pushing out there.
Yes.
That safety, that vulnerability, that being comfortable with the uncomfortable. And my hope is, honestly, my vision, my dream is, as we continue to push that message out there, people are going to bite and they're saying, hey, what can I do in my life to grow in that discomfort? What can I do in my life to level my coworkers up? Mm-hmm. And as we continue to do that, it's just going to spread like wildfire.
Yes, for sure. Yeah, and I think that once people understand the elements, they have a much greater chance, because everything in our world today, not everything, but a good chunk of it, is built to make people feel unsafe. Mm. So great for the skills of de-escalation of now, I mean, you can't de-escalate someone who's already feeling safe.
Right.
But here's what I would say is people are in a perpetual state of fear. The media is feeding you fear. The industries are feeding you fear. Advertising is feeding you fear so that you will buy their product, or you won't be cool, or you won't be safe.
Right.
Or, all the things that they tell us. So our world really does set up this fear response. And then you take people like COs, cops, military, put them into an even more unsafe environment.
Pressure cooker.
We have a responsibility to bring safety back to the table. And so, as you know, we have built the 8-hour day that we're training these folks to teach. It is actually a model of a de-escalation interaction. So we start the entire thing with creating a sense of safety from the minute they make contact with us walking into the room. Then we start unpacking the curriculum. You and I, when we walk into any classroom, what is our number one intention?
Safety is the game.
Safety. Yeah. That is it. Typically, what we see, though, in classrooms is trainers come in and they want to deliver a curriculum.
Yeah.
They want to impart knowledge.
I have a clicker.
Yes.
I'm going to read off the PowerPoint.
I'm a subject matter expert.
And when it says end of slideshow, we're done, right?
Yes. Yeah. For us, it's completely an afterthought. Yeah. They still get the information, but we want to make sure that we model what it is that we are delivering.
Yeah.
Great quote that I always bring up in my leadership courses is no written word nor spoken plea can teach our students what they should be, nor all the books on all the shelves. It's what the teachers are themselves.
Oh, wow.
And so when you have a model up there showing the way of safety, showing that this stuff is possible. I did it to you when you walked through the door today.
Yeah. The light bulbs that come on.
Yes.
They're like, oh my goodness, that's right. Right. Yes. It's so good. And I think one of the things that's often a misnomer, and we get that with our students, one of the very first questions I ask is, who was voluntold to be in this de-escalation class? And I'll tell you, they're not afraid to say that. Like, they're happy to be like, oh yeah, I was, supposed to be here. But what they quickly find is that this is not a hug-a-thug type program. This is not a program that's developed as a checkbox program either.
Yeah.
It is a meaningful training that has aspects to it and elements to it that lead to successful outcomes when it comes to volatile situations. And it's not just inmates that we're talking about. It is conflict resolution. It is, how do I communicate better with my supervisor?
Yes.
All of those things. It might even go into home life, and that's where, honestly, we have had a lot of the feedback through some of the other courses that we've taught with this material, is we've had people reach out and thank us because the way they have looked at treating their family members, it has been changed by just these simple tools. And it's not disingenuous. It's not like, oh, I know some tricks. No, it's being able to dissect a situation, recognize it because they have the information to kind of backlog on, and now they can change it and frame it in a way that will lead to that successful communication. So I think that as we move forward and continue to do this, what we found with this program is that there's so many different types of attributes that come from this class. And it's not just de-escalation, but it's also, like we said, conflict resolution, communication, it's leadership, it is culture building, it is all kinds of stuff. And I think we've done this already, but I feel like the people that go to this class have a better insight of what our leadership course is. They have a better insight on what our combating inmate manipulation is, and all that. And so why do you think that de-escalation has been kind of the catch-all to all of those elements?
Safety. Because, and the reason I say that is, think about any leader that you have served under or that you would follow down the barrel of a cannon, those leaders that you would follow to the gates of hell. They made you in some way feel safe under their care. Right? So you take it to that. You take it to de-escalation. Think of any conflict you have ever been in. Any conflict with a spouse, a child, an inmate, someone on the street. Anytime there is conflict present, the other person is saying, I don't feel safe. And when you start to look at the world through that lens, you can say, how do I make this more safe? What is the other person saying is making them feel unsafe? Maybe they don't feel heard. Maybe they don't feel seen. Maybe they don't feel respected. Now we have access into their psychology where I can start to provide things to at least make them feel safer in that moment. Most of the things that we respond to are not actual physical threats.
No, they're emotional threats.
Yeah. So we oftentimes will say, I feel safe with my coworkers. I know that they have my back. They'll follow me into a cell if I need to do a cell extraction, but I don't feel safe enough with them to open up and say, that was a rough call I was just on. I just had to cut somebody down who was committing suicide. Right? I am not willing to do that. I don't feel safe enough with you. I don't feel safe enough to tell you a secret. Right?
So what do we do after that?
Yeah.
We bottle it up.
We hold this persona of perfection and toughness and honestly, because I don't feel that the culture will accept me. I have a fear, a deep-seated fear that I will be rejected by the culture if I show emotion or human response.
Yeah.
Right? All of that comes back to, I do not feel safe.
And it's interesting because when we're working in that culture, and we talk about it, kind of in a flash, but we're working 12 hours a day in that culture for 20 years. And we wonder who the biggest threat is to corrections is. It's not the inmates. Who's the biggest threat to corrections? It's ourselves.
It's ourselves.
Yeah. And the stats show very clearly that we are the number one cause of corrections officer death is suicide. And it is not really a surprise, unfortunately. There's some days that you can really cut the negativity walking into your jail with a knife because of all of the culture from our coworkers, but also, nobody wants to be in jail, man, and so that's coming from that side too. And so, you use the term hack, but it really kind of is being able to reframe those, reframe the discomfort and reframe what safety really is outside of the physical safety, which we normally think of. It is truly emotional safety. And then if that's the case, how do we build our culture to become more safe. And I really believe that is the answer to that is modeling, right?
Yes.
It's modeling those behaviors. Yeah, super interesting. And you kind of tapped in on one thing that I feel is kind of interesting. And I don't know how deep we want to go into it, but the biggest linchpin and why this training is so effective is because we're in a position where we can, now that we're aware of it, we can see it in other people. And I don't know if you want to talk about the triune brain and kind of how we can level things up, and being more cognizant of that. But to me, this is one of the bigger takeaways that I've had out of a class, because it's actual legit science. Like it's not just fluff and rainbows. It's legitimate.
Yeah. Well, just looking at the different aspects of the brain, obviously we have our thinking brain. This is how I describe our Bruce Banner, as you know, from the Marvel universe, who becomes, when he is triggered, the Incredible Hulk, right? We all have a Bruce Banner brain, that cerebral genius that had all the doctorate degrees. We all have that thinking brain, our executive function, our problem solving, logical reasoning, our ability to sequentially put things together and come up with good decisions. Below that, we have our, oftentimes we call it our feeling brain, but it's essentially our limbic system.
Right.
Our limbic system that is a processing center for all the physical attributes that happen when you dump all the chemicals into your body in response to something. So if somebody cuts me off on the road, I have a chemical and hormonal, neurochemical and hormonal response in the body.
Right.
There's a whole bunch of stuff happening there. The limbic system is processing all that, and we can potentially evaluate it and label it as anger. I'm pissed. Somebody just did this. Below that, we have our amygdala, which is our survival brain. And essentially, and I'm just, this is controversial a bit, but I would say there's only two options once we hit survival.
Okay.
And what are those?
Well, it's fight or flight.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, people will say, there's freeze and fawn and these things, but essentially we have fight or flight. I'm forward moving or I'm getting away.
Right.
Forward, backward. Freeze is really your brain trying to decide between those two options. And
right.
We get stuck. We freeze in the moment of, can I fight this bear? Probably not.
Yeah. You can try.
Can I run? Probably not. And so we just stay still. But essentially our brain is trying to get us to move one way or the other. So yeah, what we do is, if I notice somebody is in their amygdala, survival brain, they are saying they're absolutely not safe.
Right.
Right. And the responses I get in survival brain from that individual is going to be those two things. They're either going to want to fight me physically or run away from me.
Right.
When we start to when we start to get into the other parts of the brain, so let's say you don't want to physically fight me.
Yeah.
But you are down toward survival brain.
Sure.
And this is where a lot of us get stuck, is we're teetering on the edge of an amygdala, right? So we have emotional responses of fight. We have pushback. We have anger. We have resentment. We have all the things that we say, I'm going to push back against you. And a lot of people walk around in that disposition. They're in an emotional state of fight on a regular basis.
Mm.
You also have the other, which is emotional withdrawal, isolation, those aspects of the flight response. I want to get away from you. Even silence, even just not responding is flight response.
Right.
You just said something that really bothered me, and I'm going to hold my tongue because I don't want to have a neutral conversation, and I don't want to fight you. I don't want to argue with you. I'm just going to withdraw.
Retreat. Yeah.
Retreat. Yes. And so we see that a lot. Anytime we start to see either physical fight features or emotional fight or flight features, it is a beacon that somebody's out of safety.
Right. They're in that survival brain.
They're in survival or, yes, lower down in the brain. So the question becomes, how do I create safety? And what we overlook a lot of times, we think we're all walking around neutral. Just walking into one of our classrooms can put somebody down toward survival brain.
Yeah.
They feel uncomfortable. I don't know anyone here. What's the test going to be?
Yeah.
We saw it today.
Yes, we did.
As our students right now are gearing up for teach backs where they have to teach in front of their peers tomorrow. They are in flight. They're in fight. Some are saying, I don't know if I want to show up tomorrow.
Right.
Right.
So far, we got everybody, the same amount of people that showed up on Monday are still here. So that's good. That's a win. But absolutely. And the reason why I kind of wanted to walk through that is because I think there's so much value in looking at that fight or flight piece, because that is how we recognize it in others. That is how we can start to now work that level system, that's part of the class. So when we go back to fight or flight, the common thing to look at is with inmates, right? I think that's the most recognizable piece of it. But really, when we're looking at our coworkers, what are some different ways that can show up for our coworkers?
It shows up probably more with our coworkers. We have quite often a steady, perpetual disposition of anger, of resentment, of protection.
Yeah.
Studies show that repeated exposure to trauma actually grow the amygdala. It grows the survival brain in response to that, so that the world begins to get filtered through a fight or flight response rather than just looking at the world as it is. And as you know, in our field, trauma after trauma after trauma.
And what people don't realize is that, trauma gets thrown around a little bit, but the traumas that corrections officers sees are really just a picture into the lowest, most disheartening parts of society.
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily violence, though there's that too, right? It's suicide, but it's also child abuse. It's also neglect. It's also drug addiction, mental health. It is so much, and you have a front row seat to it, and you don't just get to be a spectator, you also have to manage it and try your hardest to do it effectively. So within the walls, things that most COs, I would say, maybe I'm exaggerating, but most COs would say, well, those aren't traumas. They 100% are. You can't unsee the things that our men and women in those walls have seen. And so you mentioned that they start to grow the amygdala and start viewing life through fight or flight.
Yeah.
And when we get there, we talk about fight just being resistant to stuff, arguing a lot, being super testy, but also with the flight piece of it, I think we see that a lot in that same type of withdrawal. Hey, I'm going to go over to this corner of the booking area and I'm not going to talk to anybody. Or maybe when the clock strikes 6, they're bouncing and they're not having a good time chatting with people or debriefing, that type of thing, right? And then at home, going back into their addictions, their things that cover up that. And so is there a way to rewire the brain and I don't know, shrink the amygdala? Has there been any research? I don't know.
Yeah, that's the beauty of neuroplasticity. We know that you can rebuild the brain. I mean, it's like going away from the gym for a few years and your muscles atrophy and you start working out again and you can go back to normal if you start taking care of yourself.
Right.
Just a couple of things there that I think are important. You have a trauma. Now, a lot of us think of traumas as big events, right? But trauma, as the Trauma Resource Institute essentially defines it, this may not be verbatim, but what they say is it's anytime you perceive you or someone around you is in physical danger.
Interesting.
So with that, bringing the definition to be that simple, that is a regular occurrence day after day for
it's every shift, man.
It's every shift, multiple times, trauma after trauma after trauma. You and those are what we would say bigger things, right? You also have what we call complex or compounding PTSD, PTSI, post-traumatic incidents or injury, which is just smaller events that over time build up to have a significant emotional toll. I remember I had a civilian working for me that said, I have anxiety just pulling into the driveway. Now, she wasn't exposed to trauma on a regular basis or anything like this, but small, significant emotional events for her built up over time and can actually be more damaging. We also have secondary trauma. Secondary trauma is where you didn't actually experience what happened, but you heard about it, you read about it, and because of that, your brain is wired for protection, that it is going to feel those same things. It's the mirror neurons. It's
a beware type
empathy,
situation.
Yeah. So one of the biggest culprits of secondary trauma is our peers, because what do you want to do? You want to get it off your chest. So I come into shift. Let me tell you what happened, right? You just shared your trauma with me, and I'm part of that secondary trauma. And so we have a lot more trauma than just what we experience from our peers, from our friends. And then you have, that vicarious trauma where it's very much like the complex or compounding, where it is over time things build up. Yeah.
Sure. So, yeah, it's a tough world to work in. And it takes a certain kind of person with a certain type of training and mindset to be able to experience those things and then filter them in a way to not, get burned out after 7 years of doing the gig, So with that, what are some tools? Because, we probably talked about it before in our first podcast, but you are a human performance expert. What are some tools that our corrections officers can use to combat a lot of those traumas? Maybe not the traumas, but the after effects to those things.
Yes. And sorry, I missed your question before. I didn't even circle back to it. Studies have shown that you can rewire the brain with meditation practices. Now, I know that meditation is one of those things that a lot of people feel uncomfortable with, right? Because they think it's hippie woo-woo and all the things. And to be honest, I was one of those people until I started studying the science of meditation and then getting into the old wisdom traditions and figuring out what it was all about. We also hear it almost regularly used simultaneously with mindfulness.
Right.
And I differentiate those two in this way. When I think about meditation, I bring all of my attention inward so that I bring my attention to a single point of focus, and I start to become aware of my thoughts that are running under the surface. What is this dialogue? What am I telling myself? I become aware of them and I let them go. So I remove my sensory experience to go inward. When I am mindful in the moment, it's the exact opposite. I am clearing the mental clutter so that I can be aware of what I'm experiencing through the five senses, what in this moment is going on. What do my clothes feel like on my body? What is the temperature in the room? What am I tasting in my mouth? What am I hearing? The buzz in the room that's been there the whole time, but now I am aware of it.
Right.
And both of those things, and you can combine them into mindful meditation. Buddhism is known for bringing that and the such. But the reality is meditation can bring you into a place where you can rewire the brain, bring it back to a steady state. They have shown that 60 days of regular meditation can do that. Just 60 days. You think about the amount of work we put into damaging our brains.
Years.
Yeah. So that is one practice. Mindfulness is also one of those things that when you are mindful, you bring yourself into the present moment.
Mm.
Right? When you are thinking about nothing but this, when you think about what the couch feels like right now that you're sitting on,
right?
When you think about all the things that we talked about, right? What is it? What is the temperature of the air right now that's going into your nose? How far into your lungs is it traveling?
Wow.
How far out is it retreating? When you bring yourself into the present moment, the past goes away and the future is no longer a concern for you.
Mm.
And so what they have found is that when you are present, you are more happy.
Interesting.
Right? Because most of our unhappiness comes from reflecting on all of our regrets and all this from the past. I should have went this way instead of that. I should have done this instead of that. I really shouldn't have done that. And when it comes to the future, we have all this fear about what's gonna happen, what's out there, what do I need to worry about? But when we bring ourselves just into this space with mindfulness, we tend to be happier. And both of those two things are hacks to human performance. One, rewiring the brain back to a place of safety, but also creating the hormonal and neurochemistry in the body to be happy in the present moment.
Right. I love that, man. What it does is it brings hope, right? It brings hope for people that have experienced so much trauma, that they're in a position where they don't want to go back to work. So it's such a great way of identifying some tools that can help make life better, and not just at work and not just to keep working. Like we're not just soldiers like that, but I think the idea is that how do we have meaningful lives outside of work while also being able to be super high performing while we're inside those walls. So so much good stuff there.
Well, one thing with that, just to speak to what you just said, is Donna Hicks in her book Dignity gives a really cool illustration of we can only be in one of two states.
Right.
Self-preservation or self-extension. Self-extension is where we put ourselves out there to connect with other human beings. We know this is where our success comes from. This is where our fulfillment comes from. We are, as a species, supposed to be connected to other human beings. We cannot be there if we are in a perpetual state of self-preservation.
Right.
You're either in self-preservation or in self-extension. And so we get locked down into the space of self-preservation and we cut people off. Any one of the people who hears this, I guarantee has heard or said, I cannot wait to retire. I've got this many days on my countdown calendar and I've got a place in Montana picked out. I've already got the property. I'm going to get the hell away from people, right? What they are saying is I am in withdrawal. I am in flight response. I do not want to self-extend.
Right.
But all that is an indication that they are locked in self-preservation. They don't feel safe.
They don't feel safe.
They don't feel safe.
Wow. Such good lessons, man. And it has been such a blessing to be able to train with you.
Likewise.
And what's really interesting, and just to kind of put a wrap on it, but it's very unlikely that my skill set, which is tactics, it's defensive tactics, firearms, less lethal stuff, and your skill set, which is communication, human performance, wellness models. Like the traditional way of thinking of training is we should be operating in silos. We should not be in the same training course, but it is proven every time, whether it was in Dubai, whether it was at the state, whether it was here, that combination is so meaningful. And the analogy that we kind of came up with is software and hardware. And I know that you no longer cringe when I call them soft skills.
No, I loved your analogy with this.
But the idea is that without your hard skills, your tools and tactics, that's like hardware, right? And the hardware cannot possibly operate without the software. You have to have both of those things, and vice versa. You can be the best operating system ever, but if you don't have honed hardware, it doesn't have any good either. So I think if you're a listener out there, you've never seen one of our classes, or if you've never had the opportunity to come to our classes, it is awesome because you get both aspects of both the hardware and the software. And this is a perfect class to kind of frame that because of all the different things we talked about. So it's been a pleasure, man. Any final thoughts for the listeners?
Yeah, you talked about the level up that we do, and we do model that. You are an incredible friend of mine, always leveling me up, always pushing me to become better.
Well, back at you.
You're not afraid to tell me where I could have done better. And I really believe in cultivating those kind of relationships in life. One, going back to that idea of hardware, software, the hardware can get upgraded and updated, but oftentimes, it's tried and true, right? Here is your hardware. It's got all the necessary components. Boom, that's your hard skills. The software has to be repeatedly cultivated. This is why when you take a brand new phone out of the box, what's the first thing?
Got to do your update.
Got to do an update, and it's constantly asking you to do updates and upgrades and manage this. And if you don't, it's going to slow your system down, or it's not going to operate correctly, or it's going to drain your battery. And what I see is people put a lot of work into the hard skills, and they're ignoring the thing that's draining their battery. They're ignoring the thing that's slowing their operating system down. And they're unwilling to take those messages of, this is what will clear your cache. This is what will clear your system.
Yeah.
And so I'm just really thankful to have people like you in my life that are willing to say, this is where you're not perfect. Because I am, in fact, imperfect.
But when we do that, though, because you do it for me too, when we do that, it's not out of pushing down, circling back. It's about leveling up. Yeah. And that is the culture that not only we enjoy because it helps us make us better, but it's also that we try to push to our students to help make agencies better as well.
Yes.
So, awesome. Well, thanks, man. I appreciate your time.
Thanks for the chat.
Absolutely. It was a good time. All right, man.